Welcome back, everyone, to our final video seminar. This is number 5, and it is on communicating with college coaches. We hope that you have found the first 4 seminars to be very helpful, and we hope this video ties together some of the loose ends. So let's get right into it. So first, just some general things on NCAA recruiting contact rules. Again, these are general. The NCAA dead period, I think as most of you know, has been extended through August 31st. And unfortunately, it could be extended longer. That's the reason why Division I coaches aren't able to be at our camps this summer. And for Division I and Division II, normally, according to the contact rules, recruits can begin actually communicating directly coaches back and forth on June 15th going into their junior year. And then there's a quiet period, which is currently happening for Division II. And let me explain that briefly. A quiet period versus a dead period, which is dead period Division I. Quiet period means that student athletes can visit campus. It just means that coaches can't be actively recruiting off campus in most situations. Dead period means that there's no on or off campus recruiting. And then for Division III, there's really not a recruiting calendar like there is for Division I and Division II, and there's really limited contact rules. So pretty much freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year coaches can be communicating back and forth. And you're going to need to go directly to the NCAA website and look there if you want specific details on recruiting rules. I could spend a whole seminar just talking about rules, and you'd get bored pretty quickly if I did. So, but just wanted to give you an idea of these general rules. And the biggest reason is just so that you understand that at any point in time for Division I and II, you can reach out to college coaches. So as a freshman or sophomore, you can. You just need to understand that you will not be able to hear directly back from them in most instances. And that doesn't mean that they're not aware of you. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, but definitely don't make the assumption that they're not getting your information, because they actually are. There's just restrictions up until June 15th going into junior year. So the key communication areas that I want to go through, and on these, please now, I'm going to try to move through them pretty fast. So if I talk quicker than even the other videos, it's going to be because there's a fair amount of information I'd like to communicate. And so I'm not going to hesitate to move through them a little bit quicker. If you can't keep up, then feel free to rewatch the video and just go back to the areas that you still had questions on. So the communication areas are phone, text, email, campus visits, social media, and then this often overlooked area of prompt communication. And so we'll really wrap it up there. And we're also going to include in this video a number of questions that we think would be helpful to be asking during this process. So starting with phone communication, the important thing to know about phone communication is, and I say this more for student athletes than parents, so parents will probably get a chuckle, phone is still a valuable form of communication for student athletes. The student athletes, as we all know, many of you probably try to call your son or daughter on the phone and you never get an answer, but if you text, you immediately get an answer. And so we all know that student athletes tend to not be as interested in having direct phone conversations. They prefer to do things via text, social media, Snapchat, etc. And so, but for college coaches who are a little bit older, there's many times where they want to be able to talk on the phone. And so student athletes need to understand that and be willing to engage on the phone. And so then the next one, because of that we also do recommend, a lot of times student athletes, my own sons included, I had to get them to put a voice message on so that when a coach would make a phone call, they would actually hear their name and know that it was actually their phone, instead of just getting the phone number that pops up and then you can leave a message. It's really helpful to leave just a professional voice message. So then the next one, we'll get into this a little bit more later, but if a coach calls, answer the phone. If at all possible, answer the phone. And, once you get, where a phone number is coming from, if it's a coach's, program it in your phone so that it's the coach when that thing pops up. And if they then call through, answer it. And if you are not able to answer it, either call back promptly or at minimum within 24 hours. And you can also have some questions prepared in advance. We think many times that's a helpful thing for student athletes to do, is just to have a set of questions on hand to make that conversation be a little bit easier. But there's also just questions that are really helpful to be able to get answered from coaches. So let's take a look at a couple of those. And here's 6 questions that we think are relatively important. And we're going to give some more questions at the end that are just questions that can be answered through anything. And these questions can also be asked at different points in the conversation. They could be via text or during a campus visit or whatever. So here's 6 of them. What is the best way? Number 1, what is the best way to be evaluated by you or a member of your staff? And you're just trying to find out, like, do they prefer club? Will they watch a high school match? Camps or clinics? If so, which ones do they go to? And then would they like to see video first? And as we've talked about in previous videos, this is becoming an increasingly important question to ask. Video is becoming even more important than it always has been because of COVID-19. And so then number 2, what are the important recruiting timelines for your program? Really, when are your evaluation periods? What are your application timelines? When I say application, I'm referring now to the admission side of things, especially if they really like to do a lot of their recruiting via early decision, which a lot of highly selective small private liberal arts colleges tend to like to do that. A lot of those are at the Division I level, but there's some that are also at the Division II and the Division I. Division I's that are high academic will tend sometimes to operate this way as well. So you really want to understand what the preferred application timelines are for college coaches, and you want to make sure that you're complying with those. And then number 3, can I meet with you if I schedule a campus visit? And then day or overnight visit, official or unofficial visit. What will it be? Would they prefer a day? You'd come in just for the day, or would they prefer for you to come in overnight? We highly recommend overnight visits as you narrow down your colleges. And then is it going to be an official or an unofficial visit? Official, really, at the end of the day, is probably going to mean that they're paying for some part of your visit, and unofficial is going to mean that they are not, because as soon as there's any form of pay for travel, etc., it then automatically has to be counted as an official visit. So next questions are number 4, what are the academic requirements for your university? And it's an important one to know. It is true that universities can flex their academic standards for student athletes. That is NCAA legal. And so it's okay to ask that question to a college coach. There's no point in wasting your time or the college coach's time if academically you're not, even with their flexibility, going to be able to qualify to be admitted to their university. So number 5, how do you see me fitting into your program? That is a question that sometimes families are nervous about asking. It is an okay question. We think it's an important question, and it's often the best question to ask to know, has a coach actually seen you, and how much do they actually know about you as a player? So and so it's a very fair question. Coaches are used to receiving that question, so don't be afraid to ask it. Number 6, what is the best way to stay in touch and keep you updated on my progress? Write down what they tell you and do it on time. And again, what's the best way to stay in touch? We're talking about multiple different modes of communication here, and so you want to know which ones they prefer the most. All right, moving on to college coach communication via texting. And in a few important points here, coaches, this has shifted greatly over, I'd say, the last 5 years. Coaches didn't used to do as much texting. There actually used to be NCAA rules that prohibited it, and but it's a very prevalent form of communication at this point in time. These restrictions that I showed on the first slide of June 15th, etc. They do apply to texting as well. Some really kind of important and helpful thoughts from our perspective is, and again, a lot of these come from talking with coaches and what they prefer. One, we recommend not using text as the first ever contact. That should be coming via, most of the time, it's probably going to come via email first, and phone could be first, whatever. It's better to use other forms of contact first. Again, most of the time, email can be the first one, and after that, texting is fine. Keep it brief, but again, make it professional. You're talking to a college coach, and so spell properly, avoid slang, and keep it positive. Don't text late at night. So I think a general cutoff for college coaches, 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night tops. And remember, you've got time zone issues depending on who you're speaking with, so factor that in as well. And different things that can be good little touch points for texting. You don't want to overdo it. So, once or twice a week texting, unless coaches are texting you back more frequently than that, don't overdo it. But things that you can do, like a really nice one, is to just congratulate on a recent win would be a good example. Or if you're tracking them via social media or directly from their website and they have players named All-American or All-Conference, those kind of things can be just nice little things to text and just congratulate on. And it's just a good way to keep yourself then in front of the coaches. But again, don't overdo it. If they don't respond after about 2 to 3 texts, then back off. You don't want to overdo the communication with coaches if they're not responding back. So, and again, they can't respond to freshmen and sophomores, so just be aware of that. All right, college coach communication via email. So in the first video, we talked about fit and how fit really then gets into the ability to be highly personalized with email communication. We're going to go back and take a look at the one email ever so briefly in a little bit, but we've already kind of hit a lot of that. I want to get into some other things that you can think about doing with your email account, some very practical guidelines that we find can be helpful for families that are trying to email directly to college coaches through their own personal email accounts. Some of you may be using a service. Again, we're not that excited about most of them for reasons that I've already indicated. So here's some things that you can do with your own email account. And the first one is to create a separate email account just for your college recruiting process. It helps to keep things much more organized and separated so that you can stay on top of it. 2, make sure you have an appropriate email name. Make sure that it's professional and not edgy like the one that I have here, hotstuff11@gmail.com. Just make sure that it's professional. If you know how to create folders, they're actually relatively simple to use. If you're a Gmail user, they're really easy to use, and you can even just Google and ask how to create a folder, and it'll pop right up. But create separate folders for each college you're communicating with so that you can keep your communication organized and make it easier to respond in a timely manner. Again, timeliness is really, really important. And then number 4, attach email tracking software to your email account. There is a software program called MailTrack that we think is a pretty good, simple one to use. And so really all that's doing is allowing you to know when you send an email if the coach has actually opened it. And that it can just be a helpful thing to turn around and to know, even as then regards when and how to follow up. And then the final one on really these practical suggestions is to create a signature. And you can see below the areas that we think are helpful to put on that. So, it's just name, city, state, high school, club team, and cell phone numbers. And really what you're trying to do there is just make it as easy as possible when you're emailing coaches for them to be able to quickly and easily recognize who you are and respond back to you. And that's why we even like including high school and especially club team in your signature. Sounds a little bit unusual. It's fine to do it that way. All right, and then moving into the email. And I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, but for those of you that did not see the first video that we did on College Fit, we think that fit is by far the most important factor in the entire recruiting process. So we highly encourage you to go back and look at that video. And by proactively determining colleges that might be a good fit, and these 10 fit points that we reference in that video, it's going to allow you to be able to narrow down and be personal in your outreach to college coaches. And so as we've talked about before, coaches are receiving thousands of emails every year, and because of COVID, so it's very difficult for them to be able to really deal with and process all of those. They quite frankly can't. So they have to narrow down and filter out the ones that they're going to respond back to, and really the ones that they're not going to. And you want to be obviously one that they respond back to. And the best way to do that is to be highly personalized in the way that you reach out to college coaches. And so the idea of sending out, to hundreds of college coaches, like a lot of the recruiting services tell you, is very wrong-headed. You need to be brief, but highly personalized. And so as you look at this email, again, I'm just going to point out a couple of the different things in here that make it personalized, highly personalized. And so some of those things, and when I say personalized, there are these little statements that make it clear that you know who their university is, that you're addressing that specific university, and there's specific reasons why you are interested in that specific university. So Zlatan Ibrahimovic, LA Galaxy Academy, that's all fine. But it specifically mentions, I'm reaching out to let you know of my interest in ACA University. So it specifically mentions the name of the college. But then it goes beyond that. And some of the recruiting services have the ability to, they're what we call form fields. So you could send out to 20 people and it could actually say ACA University if you know how to use the form fields in their software. College coaches know that. So you have to go beyond just naming the college and include some reasons why you might be interested. And so congratulations on making the NCAA tournament again last year, for winning the Atlantic Conference for the second straight year. The only way you can include that information is if you've done specific research on their university. And that sends a statement to the college coach that this isn't just a random mass recruiting email that you've sent out to hundreds of college coaches. I watched a few of your games last season via live stream, and I really liked the system and style of play. That does the same thing I just mentioned. It's specific to them. I have family on the West Coast, so ACA's location really appeals to me. That makes a very important geographic statement to a coach, especially if you're an East Coast or maybe a Midwest family. That coach may turn around and look and say, yeah, we don't really yield that well from the East Coast or from the Midwest. But if you have family there, you've already made a decision that this might be a good fit, and that geography is not necessarily a problem. My apology for the glitch there. So geographic location can be a really helpful one, and then indicating potential major, as you can see below, engineering program, can also be very, very helpful. And then the attaching of student athlete resume and filling out your recruiting questionnaire. And again, we've covered those things as well as highlight video in previous videos, so I'm not going to elaborate on those right now. Just refer back to our previous videos. All right, the next one, campus visits. And there's a lot that we could talk about with campus visits. The points that I'm going to get into for the moment are really these. The single most important thing that I can say, and this is through the entire recruiting process, but it becomes the most profound when there are campus visits that are occurring, and it's this, because it's where it comes out the most, and that's that parents must let student athletes do the talking. when you talk with college coaches, they complain about it all the time. We had a student athlete come to campus and we hardly even got to know him because every time we ask a question, the parent answered it. And we just didn't get to know the student athlete. And that's the person who we're going to be dealing with for the next 4 years. And we just didn't get to know them because of the parents. And so through the entire process, but especially on campus visits, you need to let your son or daughter do the talking. It's critically important in the recruiting process. And challenges with that. One of the things that we really recommend for parents, because we realize that can be a difficult thing. Parents want to do talking sometimes because parents like to talk because they have their own really good questions and because they're excited, or maybe they want to brag about their son or daughter. We understand all that. But a big one a lot of times is you're helping your student athlete who may struggle to be able to do that, and they're nervous. They're in person, face to face with a college coach. So our recommendation is to help student athletes to prepare a list of questions beforehand. And you can even refer back to the phone ones I talked about. I'm going to list some other ones here at the end of this seminar. But prepare a list of questions in advance. And then, as strange as it may sound, role play. Just sit and review them. And again, we think it's a decent idea to actually role play them. Parent can act as the coach, student athlete obviously acts as the student athlete. Can be a really helpful way to overcome some of those nerves and just to be a little bit prepared as well. Okay. College coach communication as regards social media. And so on this one, it's a little bit hard to know sometimes, I think, how to really be able to work and engage college coaches via social media. But it has obviously become a much more important thing. And obviously student athletes are quite comfortable with social media. Oftentimes, for many coaches, more comfortable and knowledgeable about social media than even the college coaches are. So some practical example guidelines. One would just be to like and follow colleges that you're interested in. And for the coaches that are tracking all of that, it's just another statement that you are potentially interested in their university. So it's just one of those helpful little ways to call your attention to a coach. And then this one, people hear it all the time. I'll belabor it a little bit. Be very careful what you post online and keep it clean. The coaches are tracking all of this. The universities are increasingly putting, I would even call it, pressure on coaches to make sure that their student athletes that are on campus have clean social media, but also to have done the needed research before recruiting a student athlete and officially having them become a athlete on their campus. They're really pressuring coaches, requiring to really scrutinize student athletes' social media in their high school years, and to really even go back somewhat and really try to look through their posts, their social media, to make sure that there's nothing that would negatively then reflect on the university or the athletic department or the specific sports program. And so what that means for student athletes is they really need to go back and review all of their previous posts. And if at all possible, again, fortunately, as negative as inappropriate things get shared, sometimes you're able to remove it from your own, but it still remains on someone else's, and it can then emerge that way. But which is a big reason why we say just don't post anything that in any way would be in any way questionable, but to go back and delete anything that you think might not represent you well. And I can't stress that strongly enough. There's obviously all kinds of media examples of this and the really negative consequences that occur when people fail to get this right. So, and then college coaches check it a lot more than you realize, as I think I've kind of indicated. on to an often overlooked area, and that is prompt communication. Can't stress the importance of this enough. Prompt communication tells coaches that you are serious about their college. And the reason why I say that is with coaches recruiting dozens and dozens and dozens of student athletes, and kind of how we've said that they get thousands of emails, also obviously text, phone calls, all of that. What it really means is coaches are talking with, a fair number of student athletes, and yet, maybe 5, 10 student athletes of that entire group end up coming to their college, right? So college coaches, the psychology of it for college coaches, that they tend to be a bit pessimistic when it comes to recruiting. And what that means is they often look and turn around and are thinking in their minds, well, at the end of the day, we probably won't get this particular student athlete. And they're always looking for reasons really to confirm why that might be true. So they can really then at that point scratch them off the list and move on to the next one where they think they have a better chance. So coaches are always kind of evaluating, what are the odds of them being able to turn around and have a student athlete actually be interested in a manner that then leads to them actually committing to their college. And so they've got to really use their time well and move on pretty quickly if they don't get feedback that really helps them to indicate that it's worth them continuing to invest more time. So the reason why I say all that is that's why prompt communication is so important. When a coach doesn't hear promptly back from a student athlete, they often convert that in their mind to, well, they must not be that interested. Many times for student athletes, it's not actually true. They're either just busy or they're just not really used to having to respond to things promptly. And you do that at your own peril if you fail to be prompt because of the way that college coaches so many times perceive it. If you want to keep the dialogue going with the coach, every time they reach out, respond back quickly. And so that's to the next point. Prompt communication encourages coaches to continue to communicate with you for the reasons I've indicated, and it makes them think you aren't seriously interested if you don't. Additionally to that, sometimes it will cause coaches, lack of prompt communication will cause coaches to question your intangibles, your work ethic, your discipline. Are you responsible? And again, for college coaches, if they feel like they're constantly having to track you down now in the recruiting process, they're going to convert that in their mind to, am I going to have to do that for 4 years? Am I going to have to track them down when it comes to just various different things that we need done? Have they worked out in the weight room? Are they doing their conditioning? Are they reporting that stuff back to us on time? Are they going to show up to the locker room on time? Are they going to show up to a team meeting on time? All of those different things. Coaches don't want to have to be chasing their student athletes for 4 years when they're on their campus. And so your ability to be prompt is showing these intangibles that are important for college coaches as they consider whether or not they would like to have you be at their college for 4 years. And then the final one, right? I think this one is obvious, but I think people miss it a lot of times. Do you want others to get back to the college coach before you? It's competitive. You are not just the only person that they're speaking with, obviously. And that means that if others are better at communicating than you are, they may end up getting an offer and you may not. And so you're in a competitive space. You need to realize it when it comes to prompt communication. So really, really important area in this whole thing. All right, and then finally, additional questions for coaches. And there's obviously a lot of different questions that you can ask. These are just a handful of questions that we think can be really helpful for all of you. And I'm going to read them pretty quickly, and then you can go back and just refer to these later on. What are next steps for me in the recruiting process? Do you need to see me play more? Are you recruiting my position for the class of blank? How many players do you typically bring in with each class? It's a fine, appropriate question to ask. Do you ever cut players? Another fine question to ask. What does your recruiting timeline look for the class of blank. And then when do you expect to be done recruiting for the class of blank? And so kind of finishing up with those final two, the recruiting timeline look like for the class of blank. So it's a question that we highly encourage people to ask so that you understand what the time frames are for recruiting for that particular college, because they tend to vary. The timelines tend to vary from Division 1, 2, and 3. And they also tend to vary even within divisions. So I'll give you a couple of examples of this. Division 1, if it's what we would call a top tier, and when I say top tier, what I'm referring to is let's call it a top 25 or a top 50 or a top third Division 1 program in terms of program strength and quality. Those institutions are going to be recruiting on an earlier and completing their recruiting classes earlier than Division 1 institutions that are in the bottom third. That's a general statement, but as a general statement, it holds very true. And so you need to understand that. At the Division 3 level, an example would be highly selective, as you've heard me say many times, highly selective liberal arts institutions. They tend to recruit considerably earlier than less selective Division 3 academic institutions. And so once again, it varies even within divisions. So you really want to understand that and ask that question early on, as it helps you then to know how to deal with that particular institution in a way that respects their time frame, so that you can increase your chances of continuing through the recruiting process with that college. And then finally, as we've been doing, just 3 commonly asked questions. And so for this, number 1, how is our child supposed to do most all of the talking with a college coach when they've never done that and are nervous? And we get this question all the time. And we understand it. And I don't know that I have great answers. It's a challenge. But we know that unequivocally, as I've indicated previously, college coaches want to talk to student athletes. They don't want to spend much time talking with parents. You know, it varies from coach to coach, but it is true across the board. So once again, role playing can be a really helpful thing. Preparing questions in advance can be a really helpful thing. And then something that even I've had to do with my own sons is bite my own tongue and just bite it and give time for your student athlete to be able to answer. Let there be a little bit of silence if there needs to be. Resist that urge that I think we all have as parents to kind of want to jump in and end the awkwardness or the silence. So hopefully those are a couple of helpful things. We realize it's challenging, but you have to do it. So the more you can prepare for that in advance, the better. But you have to do it. It's a really important part of the process. And then 2, do coaches mind receiving texts from student athletes? It's something that people still ask us. And as I've indicated previously, but we've put it in here because we do get the question a fair amount. Yes, it's okay for coaches to receive texts. They don't mind it. For some reason they do, they'll tell you. But as long as you're respectful, given the guidelines that I've presented previously, and are just a bit sensitive to that way per those guidelines, you'll be fine. Don't hesitate to do it. And then this final one, do you encourage campus visits? And we hear this one a lot. And so and I think the reason why we hear it the most is because that's the part that's the most time consuming and it really can cost the most money. And I think another reason why sometimes we hear it is because there's a lot of families that don't narrow down on fit first, per that first seminar that we had. And as a result, really, they're just looking at far too many colleges, which makes campus visits even more challenging. And so, if a family is properly narrowed down and been proactive in trying to determine fit first, it makes it a lot easier to them to be more narrow over time, and then to do campus visits, but with a smaller group of colleges. And so for campus visits, we highly encourage campus visits, the most important area and way in which we encourage them is once student athletes are into their junior and maybe their senior year if they haven't yet made a choice. And what we say is we really encourage student athletes to not make a final decision on their college where they'll spend their next 4 years without doing campus visits at each of their final schools. So let's just say that you've narrowed down to 4 or 5 colleges. Our recommendation ideally is to not just do a day visit, but to do a overnight visit with every college that you are going to, that you're very serious about as a potential final destination. Part of the reason for that, the overnight visit. The day visit, that's going to allow you to turn around and meet with the coaching staff, maybe admissions, do a campus tour. Those things are really important, obviously. But what the overnight visit does is allows you to spend time with the student athletes, with the players on the team. And that allows you to achieve a couple of things. Is that group of student athletes a group of people that you actually feel like you can relate to and you could see yourself spending 4 years with? And then the second part of it is you hear sometimes a version of the program that comes from the coaches. And I'm not saying that they're being dishonest. Maybe sometimes they're shading the truth a little bit. It just depends on who it is. But obviously they want to put a very positive foot forward. And you're going to hear about the program at minimum from a different angle and a different perspective through the eyes of the student athletes. And it's a really important perspective. And sometimes you're also going to discover from student athletes when you're just kind of hanging out with them in the evening that they actually haven't had that positive of an experience at the school. And in those scenarios where it's not just one student athlete that's saying that, but it's multiple members of a team, well, you can scratch that college off of your list at that point. And so the overnight visit allows you to understand if you're going to fit in well with the players on the team. And it allows you, again, to get much broader perspectives on what it is like through the eyes of a student athlete to be at that institution. Sport academic balance, how do you balance those two things? You'll be able to hear that from them. And then again, the other things that I've indicated. So we really encourage people to not make a final decision until they have done overnight visits at their final list, their final group of colleges. So yes, we do encourage campus visits. We think they're incredibly important. So that wraps up our 5th and final seminar. We hope that you have found all of our 5 seminars to be helpful. We've tried to really highlight a lot of the key areas that we think that you need to know right now. And if you have additional questions, you are able to go to Future 500 ID Camp and just go to our blogs. We've got a lot of helpful information there. And you can also go to Athlete College Advisors and any of our social media. And there is a lot of helpful information there as well that's free. And then there's obviously also the ability to sign up for our programs. I'm not going to get into much detail on that now. You can simply go there and take a look at what the offerings are if you have any interest in that as well. But we do have a online course which really takes a lot of the information that we've spoken about and goes in even greater depth on it. And so feel free to visit there as well. And thanks so much for listening to the video seminars. Again, we hope that you have found them to be very helpful. And very importantly, we hope that your son or daughter has had a great experience at our Future 500 ID Camp this summer, even with really kind of the adjusted measures that we've had to take. So we wish you the very, very best as you move forward, and thanks so much.